notes, this practice was continued in the 20th century. In time of famine, young Chinese girls were often killed so they would not have to be fed. Now, so this went on in the 20th century. In the 20th century, when the Chinese government passed laws that couples could not have more than 2 babies, a lot of Chinese couples would kill their female babies in an attempt to make sure that the family name was carried on. And they forgot something. Without their female babies, the family name was not going to be carried on anyway. What happened was a generation of Chinese men grew up who could not find wives. Now, I want to ask you, how many of you have heard about this outside of this class now? Okay, then I'm telling you, know what, I'm not making it up. It sounds so fetched that every time I come to this part, I ask, you know, I get to wonder, oh, do they think I'm making it up? No, I'm not making it up. This actually went on. Now, in the last 5 or 6 years, the Chinese government passed a law outlawing the practice of killing babies. So maybe the next generation of Chinese men will be able to find wives. But again, this practice went on for about a whole generation, and a lot of Chinese men were left. There were far more Chinese males than there were females. Well, this happened in time past too. A lot of times these countries, the things that they did in time past, they will do in the modern times too. Having said that, a lot of women who abort their babies will let a male baby grow up and abort the female babies. This practice goes on in this country right now. All right. Moving on from China to Japan. Japan during this time became unified. The book talks about 3 great unifiers, but the process of unification took a while. Japan consists of, you might know, 4 islands. I'm not going to ask you to learn them, but to 4 islands that are fairly close together. And in general, they have had the practice of discouraging foreigners from coming in. And they don't need to build a wall. They have hundreds of miles of ocean to separate them from everybody else. They want the land of Japan to be only for the Japanese and no one else. For a time, they tried to lock themselves in and lock foreigners out. However, eventually, a missionary went to Japan. The first missionary to go was Francis Xavier. And yes, Xavier University is named after him. He was a Jesuit. Like the Chinese, the Jesuits got there pretty early. Francis Xavier went to Japan. He converted a few of Japanese, including some of the Japanese nobility. Initially, unlike the Chinese, the Japanese were fascinated with European artifacts, European weapons. The Europeans had really good pistols and rifles at this time and good cannon. Some Japanese warlords visited Europe and saw European castles and came back and copied the castles and made castles like the ones they'd seen in Europe. But they eventually ran into problems. The Pope wrote a letter to Xavier and the other Jesuit missionaries insisting that they submit to him more so than to their emperor, that all persons who converted to Catholicism should look on the Pope as being the head. The Japanese suspicions began to be aroused. And then, folk, and here's where the Christians made their biggest mistake. A lot of Christians would topple over or destroy Japanese idols and try to destroy their shrines or their temples, or even turn some of their temples into churches. This led to the missionaries being expelled from Japan. This turned the Japanese hard against Christianity. The emperor ordered that all Jesuit missionaries leave the country. Christian merchants were still allowed to remain, but missionaries were not welcomed. The clashes kept on between Christian and pagan interests until eventually all Christian missionaries were expelled. Christians were persecuted, and the persecution intensified with time. Eventually, the Japanese emperors expelled all Europeans from Japan, except your book says one small colony of Dutch people were allowed to stay for whatever reason. The Dutch at this time had taken over Indonesia, but all other Christians, all other Europeans were expelled from Japan. This was the initial contact between Japan and the outside world. Now, Japan does not have a lot of good farmland, so they quickly had to industrialize. And unlike China, they industrialized rather quickly. But their laborers who worked in their factories were paid very, very little. And the poor in Japan would often become poorer. Japan's population growth was very slow due to about, well, your book mentions 3 reasons: late marriage, abortion, and infanticide. You know, Japanese men and women were not married until they were in their late 20s or early 30s often. And also, the Japanese did not have any qualms against killing a baby after it's born, the practice called infanticide. Rather than try to kill it before it's born. Abortion is where you kill a baby before it's born, and infanticide, kill it after it's born. The Japanese had no qualms about it. And I'm going to jump to the 21st century, folks. When a war is over, the soldiers come home and they tend to have a lot of babies rather quickly. It's called a baby boom. I myself am a war baby. My dad was from World War I, the baby boom after World War I, and I was in the baby boom after World War II. In Japan, they had a baby boom for that only lasted 4 years. Then the baby boom stopped. The world went through a period of time where it said we need to practice birth control. We have too many people. The world will not be able to contain all the people we have. We've got to stop producing children. And this practice, by the way, this idea is still going on. The Japanese did a better job of it than most anyone else. All right, now here's what's going on in Japan today. Japanese young girls are growing up to become women. They are only interested in their careers. They have no interest in marriage, in sex, in babies, or any of that stuff. And the Japanese men are wondering, what are we going to do? And this shows no sign of changing. A couple years ago, it made world news. The Japanese were selling more diapers for old people than they were selling for young people, for babies. Because they don't have the baby, they're not producing the babies. And they have, your book will wind up saying Japan has a graying, aging population. In any society, it's the young people who support the old when they get too old to work for themselves. There's no young being produced to support the old, or hardly any. All right. Some of you might have heard of this same thing outside of this class, but now this is, again, it's not new. Japan went through this while China had a big population boom. Japan went through the same thing, and you might wonder how come Japan was able to defeat the Chinese in World War II simply because the Japanese industrialized and developed Western-style warfare while the Chinese were still primitive. Anyway, now I'll tell you this, what I really think about birth control. Every human being produces more than he consumes on average, therefore what we need is more people. I mean, if I could go back to the year 1300 and advise and say what you people need to do is populate like everything, because you need to start building roads and highways and learning to pave roads, and it takes a lot of people, and eventually you'll develop automobiles and airplanes, or they might, what's an automobile? You'll find out quickly enough. What they needed was more people, and I really honestly believe that what we need in the world today is more people. If you're shocked, I meant to. All right. Anyone want to comment? Your comments are welcome. All right, I'll move on then from Japan to Korea. Korea did not industrialize at that time. They tried to maintain their farming traditions. About being farmers, one of our presidents, Thomas Jefferson by name, hoped that the United States become a nation of farmers. He said that the practice of farming promotes character, promotes morality, improves your trust in God, because a farmer, a lot of time, all he can do once he plants the seeds is hope to heaven that the rains come. And a lot of times they don't. But nevertheless, and Hamilton said, no, we need to become a nation of craftsmen. We wound up becoming a little bit of both, a nation with few farmers, but the farmers are huge, and a lot of factories, a lot of crafts. But in the case of the Japanese, they had to develop factories. Korea tried to maintain their agrarian traditions. The poor people in Korea became poorer. Korea became known as the Hermit Kingdom because they tried to lock foreigners out. Lock themselves in, lock foreigners out. Now, the Japanese invaded Korea during this time and they ran into disaster. The Koreans proved to be really tough. The Manchu from Manchuria, Manchuria is right next to Korea, they invaded them. They ran into disaster too. The Koreans were able to keep their enemies out at this time. Europeans would visit Korea, but Europeans' ideas made very little headway, and Christianity did not get far in Korea. And Korea eventually expelled all their Christian missionaries. Now, I'm going to jump around. I've been told I shouldn't do it. I'm going to jump to the 21st century. At this time, in the 1600s, early 1700s, Korea expelled all its Christians. Today, the most Christian nation on the face of the earth is South Korea. They have the highest percentage of people attending church on any Sunday of any other country in the world. They're half Christian and half Buddhist, but I can't say that the United States right now is, half its people do not attend church on Sunday. But the largest Christian churches in the world are now located in South Korea. And they're, like I say, the most Christian nation on earth, even though they're still half Buddhist. The religions that wound up winning in Korea are Christianity and Buddhism. Korea has been divided throughout much of its history, and it still is, with North Korea starving and South Korea prospering. And that's odd because when they divided up the land, North Korea got almost all the good farmland. South Korea got to worse the land. Yes, and today South Korea is prospering and North Korea is starving. The North Koreans blamed the United States, but to me the real culprit is communism and not the United States. And North Korea continues to make a lot of news as their leader continues to shoot missiles that fly in the direction of Japan. You've all heard of North Korea shooting its missiles, trying to claim that their missiles will someday be able to reach the United States. And speaking of shooting missiles, right as I'm speaking, missiles hit one of our bases in Iraq. We can't prove it, but we're beginning to suspect that Iran is doing the firing. Some missiles have hit some ships in the Persian Gulf. Any of you aware of any of this? And we have blamed Iran. We blamed Iran for shooting the missiles. Some of the rest of the world says, hey, can you actually prove that? Well, all right, now, before we proceed to chapter 18, I want to review a little bit. Like I say, half the questions will be on chapter 15. All right, chapter 15 is about reform and state building. Who was the French king who built the Palace of Versailles? Anybody remember?
King Louis.
King Louis, excellent. Louis XIV. These kings go by their first name and by their number. Unlike other people, we generally go by our, well, among our friends go by our last name, but history books will usually use last names. Like Washington moved against Clinton, General Washington. But with kings, they go by their first names with a number attached. All right, Louis XIV built the Palace of Versailles. He's also known as the Sun King. He left the French people impoverished. Who was the great reformer who spoke out against the practice of indulgences? Do you know?
That was Luther?
Martin Luther.
Well, I mean, also Eris.
Oh, there were several. There were several. Jan Hus spoke against them, and
Luther was the big
Luther
one.
was the main one. But he was the main. Yeah, but actually, the way I worded that question, there have been several right answers. There was Zwingli, Calvin, Hus, Luther. John Calvin is famous for what doctrine he believed in? The doctrine of the Presbyterians still follow that. They're Calvinists. Doctrine of predestination. That your whole life was already laid out for you from the foundation of the world, and we are but machines at the mercy of whatever fate wills us. Predestination, fatalism. The Chinese also went through a period where they believed in, their belief could be called fatalism. Fatalism is a belief that what will be, and there's nothing at all you can do about it. You don't make your own destiny. You don't make your own future. I'll tell you one way to study. Oftentimes I would do this. To fold a sheet of paper, and on one side put a question or a name. And on the back side put, and I would look for, I might eventually cover up this side, look at this, or I might cover up this side and just look at that side. I especially learned to study Spanish that way. Put the English word on one side and the Spanish on the other, and I still do this. I mean, I'm still trying to study Spanish. But put the English word on one side, Spanish on the other, and look at it both ways. Cover up, fold over back the English word for a while, look at the Spanish word. To me, it's easier to translate from Spanish to English is to try to translate from English to Spanish when you're an English-speaking person. And no, if I hear a Spanish radio station, no, I don't understand it, but I'm working on it. It's like my dad said, they can rattle it off so fast, you'll pick up a word here and a word there. Hey, folk, keep your mind active. Because if you don't, keeping the mind active and learning is known to help offset the development of Alzheimer's. Now, you younger folk might not be concerned about that yet, but when you get to be my age, I mean, I found myself quite forgetful sometimes, and I wonder, is that old age setting in or not? Yeah, I planned to go downstairs and check and see if my son had taken care of his laundry, and an hour later I still, oops, I was able to do that, but I forgot it. This happened just yesterday to me. By the way, he had, but that's something else. Anyway, that's one way to study. Like I say, I'm not asking you to learn the names of these Chinese dynasties or Chinese leaders. Two names I do have here, though, Lord McCartney and Francis, I believe his first name is Francis Xavier. Let's see. Now, folk, who is the European who is credited with discovering America? This should be an easy one. Christopher Columbus. This should be an easy one. Yeah, it should be very, very simple. Who is credited with discovering America? Who is the first European to sail around the Cape of Good Hope and go from Europe to India. There's the first European to reach India.
What is the name start with?
Vasco da Gama.
Oh, the, yeah.
Yeah, no.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, those, let's see. Oh yeah, now, what does the word celibacy mean?
Oh, celibacy?
Yeah, celibacy.
Um,
The reason it's so important is the Catholic Church continues to demand it of its,
Oh, well,
Clergy.
they believe the practice from having a sexual,
Yeah,
yeah, basically a lot of, yeah, no marriage, yeah.
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 celibacy,
Oh, it's basically like abstinence to marriage or something?
They still
Yeah.
practice, the Catholic Church
Yeah.
still demands this. The Protestant Christians say that the clergy can marry. The Catholic Church has for centuries said that no clergymen and monks and nuns must not marry. Celibacy. All right, the last big European city that the Muslims tried to conquer, they failed. But then, of course, the Muslims fell behind the Europeans badly in technology, and the Muslim world shrunk up for a long time. But the last big European city the Muslims tried to conquer was Vienna. Excellent. I don't know who said that. Must have been, yeah, okay, excellent. Excellent. All right. Vienna. Thank you, Zinman.
That was Muhammad the second.
Mehmet II now, or Muhammad II, he's sometimes called Muhammad II. Mehmet II actually conquered Constantinople. Now, Suleiman the Magnificent went to Vienna and failed. What happened? If you know, of course, Vienna is more deep inside Europe. But when the Muslims went to Constantinople, the Europeans did not come to help them. But when they got to Vienna, that was a different matter. Poland sent a big army, and France sent an army, and Hungary sent an army, and they trapped the Muslims and almost annihilated them. But after 1680, the Muslims never made any ventures into Europe again. For one thing, like I say, technology left them behind. But another problem, again, the Muslims spent a lot of their time fighting among themselves. Now, oh yes, something I failed to mention, folk. The primary religion of Japan, Shinto. Shinto. Now, what does Shinto believe? I had a niece that had a report to do on that, and she asked me. The primary religion is Shinto. Shintoism believes that the emperor is divine and that they should keep clean. And they also try to beautify their landscape. They plant a lot of flowers in their yards, a lot of flowers, a lot of gardens, and they try to organize their garden to where they'll look beautiful. All this is part of Shinto. But other than that, the Japanese are considered the least religious people on the face of the earth, like they care a little for their religion, especially after they lost World War II. And you may know just a few weeks ago, Japan changed emperors. The old emperor abdicated after about 30 years. And the new emperor, his son, took his place. He didn't die. The old emperor didn't die. He just decided he did not want to be emperor anymore. His health is failing. So he abdicated and left it to his young son. Oh yeah, when you see the word harem, what does the word harem conjure up in your mind?
Having a lot of wives.
A lot of wives, but it's also the place where the wives are kept. The place. You know, the harem means he has a lot of wives, the place where the wives are kept. Yeah. That's this harem. It's called the private domain of the sultan, or the private domain of the shah, private domain of whoever, the grand vizier, whoever happens to be in charge at the time. Let's see. Oh yes, There was a great Russian Tsar one time who tried to catch Russia up to the west, and he turned his attention to the west. This Tsar's name, tried to westernize, he
Peter the Great.
Peter the Great. Now, Peter the Great tried to westernize Russia. All right, with that, it's almost noon. Okay,